Cool, so we're back now with our wood section. So the main idea here is we're going to be using very similar techniques that we've been using throughout these sections, and we're going to create a couple different kinds of wood, and I'm going to build it up how I would actually see it happening in real life. So we're going to start out with a kind of clean, polished, varnished wood, and then we'll move that into a layered shader and kind of dirty it up and scuff it up a little bit. So first let's start with our really clean polished wood. So I've got a whole bunch of textures that you can play around with in here. I'm going to start out first though. There's a whole bunch of like planks and stuff, and all of these are royalty free, so you can play around with them. So let's take a look at this one. So this is going to be our main base color. So I do want to go ahead, get my texture input gamma in there. And we'll see how this wraps around our object. Cool. A little bit dark, so I could brighten that up if I want to, but let's get this tiled, see how the tiling's working. Nice, it's feeling pretty cool. And like I said, so we could brighten this up a little bit if we want to. I could throw a remap HSV, or I could just be kind of lazy here and I could crank up that color gain a little bit. That looks a little bit better. For my lighting situation I'm in, that feels nice. So we're going to get our specular going next. And so, for a really simple polished wood floor, it could honestly be as simple as bringing that specular up. You can see, it's already, we've got this really clean, clear coat, polished wood. I can unlock my Fresnel. I can lower this down a little bit, depending how shiny I really want this to be. So maybe, I could lower that glossiness just a touch, just so there's a little bit of softness in it. I don't want it to be too soft because that's going to start giving the appearance of it being dirty. So, this shader in and of itself could potentially be enough for that perfectly clean floor. Where this can start getting a little bit interesting, and I can start slowly dirtying this up, for me first, I would always start with the specular that I just created. So I'm really going to get in here and, I can start breaking up that specular. So I'm going to create a file texture. And I'm just going to start with a little bit of grunge. And so this, we can grab one of our grunge textures here. I can even start with something like this. Just something to start creating some little tiny areas of, held out specular. So I can go in here now and, you can start seeing what this is doing. Do want to make sure I have my texture input gamma. Cool. And I can really see this if I look at my reflection pass. That's pretty cool. There's little areas now where they're starting to get some little nicks and dings happening. So that's working really well. I can also map this into the bump if I want to. So I'm going to duplicate this now. I'm going to connect that same place 2D texture. And, this is starting to add a little bit more of that damage. So these areas where the specular is already getting held out, I can go in and start introducing a little bit of actual damage, and little nicks and dings to this thing. So the reason I duplicated that was because I do want to turn off my texture input gamma when it's going into the bump channel. So I have my reflection color that's gamma corrected, and then I have my grunge that's not. And let's go ahead and go to our bump. There we go. So this is going to be pretty intense right off the bat. Yeah, crazy intense. Kind of looks like it got shot up by a machine gun or something. So this can be extremely light. Perfect. And now we're starting to get somewhere. So the next thing I'd probably want to do is start building in some color variation. So I could start, maybe adding some other type of grunge on top. So let's create a file texture. And, again, I'm really trying to do this in the shader. I could get in there and paint all of this stuff, of course, but there's a lot of situations that you run into where you just want to lay down a shader and use some tileable textures, and you need to be able to work fast, and you're not going to be getting in there and hand painting every single detail, especially when you're doing environment work. So let's grab, I really love this texture. I use it all the time. And I'm actually going to use it, and I'm going to remap it. Go ahead and insert my good old color remap. and I don't really need too much here. So I'm going to be adding or screening this over top using a layer texture node in Maya. So, I can go in and I could maybe make this a little bit of a brownish color, something like that. And I can just see what starts happening if and I am gonna, again, I may need, I don't off the top of my head know how that gamma is gonna work. So I can, I may need a gamma node on the end of this, just so I can control what the gamma is doing at the end of this remap right here. So let's just see what happens. I can even start out with just a plus minus average, and I can just add these two together. So I've got my file texture coming in, and we'll say out color into 3D input 0, just like that. We'll add another item here. And then we will take my remap ramp. And let's get that connected up. So we'll say out color into input 1. And then we'll map this new texture into our diffuse color. So it definitely brightened it up a little bit, but it didn't really do what I wanted, what I intended it to do. So I may want to start, maybe that dirt is actually going to go, and I can see what this is doing by brightening that up a little bit too. And all right, so it's obviously way too bright, but I could dial that back down. It's kind of interesting what it's doing. I don't dislike it. It's actually kind of cool. I do like that it brightened it up. But if I wanted to have a little bit of a layer going over top of that, maybe I want to have the same texture multiplied through the specular as well. So I can have a multiply divide, and I can take, I'd probably want to duplicate this off so that it's still connected. So we'll say duplicate special with input connections. And I'm using the duplicate special because I don't have my Hypershade open. I could use the same thing off my Hypershade if I wanted to. And anywhere I'm adding that color in up here, I want to kind of subtract it away from my specular. So I'm actually going to invert this a little bit. So where I have this darkness down here, I'm going to make that solid white. And these areas that are darker, I'm just going to bring those up. And I probably don't want much color. So something like that. And that doesn't feel too dark or too effective right now. But we should be able to see right away what that's doing. So maybe we'll shrink this. This will be better to see. There we go. And so we'll bring that in. Bring that file texture in here to input 1. And we'll go ahead and make sure our file's saved before we go connecting stuff. And now we'll bring this reflection, this multiply divide, into our reflection color. We should be able to start seeing some of those areas held out. Exactly. So that cut away into that. And I can always go in here and just totally see exactly what's going on. So see, now that really kills the specular, which is not really what I want. Just want a little bit of that going on. So something like that. And, you can really see this reflected very nicely in the specular. So we're just starting to add, a little bit of something to that specular. I can always brighten this, if I wanted to have a little bit more in here. And maybe that's a little too much red that's getting added in, so I could desaturate that a little bit. And I'm really, notice I'm always keeping my IPR open and rolling while I'm doing this. And I'm just trying my best to get this, dialed in while I'm looking at it right here. Maybe this one I can turn down a little bit until I'm feeling happy with it. And I can also bring my white up so that it clamps it. And if I'm having, I am having a little bit of a hard time seeing exactly what I'm doing, so I can always flip over to my specular. I want to bring some of these bright areas back that I'm seeing right here. So see, now those are getting a little bit brighter. And if I really clamped that, I'll get a pretty intense, see what it's starting to do there. That's pretty cool. I can see, so maybe, I guess that's definitely a little bit heavy-handed, but I could bring that back down. There's a little bit more of a fall off there, which is pretty cool. So definitely starting to get some noise introduced to that specular. I can even take this same texture and I can say, again, duplicate special. We'll go ahead and duplicate that one more time. And I can also map the glossiness with this. So this glossiness value, I probably am going to want to clamp down, and I want to be really careful with it, but this is not going to need very much. So I've got 0.9 here, so I want to maintain my bright area, the area that has that specular is still going to be 0.9. But in these dirty areas here, maybe it goes down to like 0.7. And now we can go ahead and just map that directly into our reflection glossiness. And I might have that inverted because it looks like the sharp area of the specular is right here. I wanted to keep this stuff up here nice and sharp, so maybe this part is actually going to be the 0.7, and up here this is going to be 0.9. You can see what that looks like. That looks better. So now I've got, these areas that are a little held out are a little bit blurrier. And I'm still maintaining a lot of that softness, a lot of that sharp area of my specular, which is cool. So very interesting look that I've generated just, literally with a couple grunge textures and a file texture here, which is awesome. And I'm kind of missing some of that brightness of my specular. So maybe I actually want to ease off on what's getting multiplied here. Something like that. Could be kind of cool. There we go. And maybe on my glossiness map here, rather than 0.9, I want that to be 0.95. And maybe I want to bring up this 0.7 to something like 0.8. So it still feels like a polished, like a really, like what a nice wood floor varnish is, but that it's been, getting kind of scuffed up. And I can always use my reflection amount slider to turn that down if I want to get in there, and now it's already starting to feel almost kind of dusty. And then this brings some of that shine back. Depending on your environment and the lighting, wherever this goes, you may need to dial this a little bit, but the general idea with this look dev here is that I'm getting this shader so that it feels nice across the board in all of these environments. So let's go ahead, look at our render settings here. Let's go to my RT engine. I do have the restart when render layer changes. So let's, and I always save my file. You probably noticed me obsessive compulsively saving throughout this whole thing, but we can start just going through and seeing what some of these look like. So this should restart. And there we go. So that's pretty cool. Definitely still feels nice. It feels like a nice wood shader. And then this is very soft light, so I do want to also try out the sun and sky. Nice. Looks really cool. I've got that little bling of specular there. I've still got that reflection of the sky dome. So it's feeling pretty cool. And I can always go ahead and rotate this around however I need to really make sure that this is feeling nice. Cool. And in a situation like this, I may even make the choice that maybe I need to find a balance. Maybe this is too sharp of a specular and I need to soften it a little bit more. I actually do kind of like it though. I can see these areas of specular where it's feeling nice and hot, which I like a lot. So that's pretty cool. This is beautiful right in here. We've got those little tiny areas of held out specular. Overall, this is feeling really great to me. And get that rotated back. Cool. So we will, we can bounce over to our other studio setups too. Nice. It's pretty interesting. Not quite sure what that ring is off the top of my head. Could just be a funky reflection. And then, this studio setup is actually a little bit harder. We have a harder key light. And then Studio A, I believe, matches what I was doing on the render layer or on the master layer. Yeah, exactly. So this is my default, just plain white environment, my white lighting. So this is feeling really cool. So we can build on this a little bit more and add a few scratches into this. So I'm going to stop my IPR. save my file. And I've got Photoshop here. I've got some other file textures, and this could be swapped in for my base color if I wanted to, and that would make it a little bit grungier. This is actually the texture we're going to use for what is underneath the texture that we've got right now. So you can see we've got this, this really clean texture, and then I'm going to use this to be underneath, showing some scratches through. So it's going to be a lighter, fresher color, not the stained dark red that we have. Cool. Last but not least, I have this image of actually scratched wood. And so I'm going to use this actually scratched wood to pull a mask off of it. So we're going to desaturate this. And I'm just going to mess with my levels a little bit until I get a really nice mask. So there we go. And what I really want to try and do here is get rid of some of the wood grain and just maintain some of these big scratches. Also, you can always try and use the select color range in Photoshop. Sometimes you can get lucky and that works really well depending on what's going on in your texture. So we can see if we hit that really dark area there, I think we're still going to end up getting, let's see if we do black. We'll fill that with black, and then right below it, fill that with white. So, maybe not great. We can see what happens if we duplicate that, just stack it up a few times. See if we can get some nice contrast in here. Pretty cool. Definitely not terrible. I think I'm going to need a little bit more here though, so I am going to try, we'll just duplicate this, desaturate, and we'll just really clamp this down. So something around in there to get some of these smaller scratches too. And now this one I can just put up here and set it to multiply. And cool. That's feeling kind of nice. I am just going to copy all of these into a new file. And we'll just clip this down. Actually, we'll just do a new 2048. So just a simple 2K texture. And what I want to do is, figure out a really nice place for this to be. So I'm going to crop this. And I want to start creating a tileable texture here. So I'm going to go to offset. So that actually would tile not terribly. I'm going to layer up the same texture though, and just, leave some of this. We can even multiply this. So that's kind of interesting right in there. There's definitely a little area right in there that I need to take care of. So, we can just find a good spot. We can mask this. And then we can paint some white on our mask to get this feeling a little less tiled. And see, I never really like those really soft lines. So you can go into your brushes here and find something with a little bit of noise into it. We can go to our shape dynamics and we can turn on our angle jitter and we can see what this looks like. So this is a pretty noisy, texture already. So see, that's pretty cool. So we're getting some nice breakup with that. Cool, so I'm gonna Control A, Control Shift C to copy all the layers, and then Control V to paste it. And I do need to offset this again because I pasted a bunch of stuff. Cool, and I wanna make sure there's no very visible seam lines. And again, I could even just duplicate this layer that I have here, and I can kill that mask and then paint a little bit of white in here where I know there's potentially a little bit of a seam line. That all looks fine. Right in here, need a little bit of breakup. Maybe a little bit up in there. Cool. So this should be a really nice tileable texture. Let's cancel that. There we go. And I will just save this into a PSD in case I want to go back to it later. I'll put this in the wood folder for you. I kind of winged that, and it's actually pretty awesome. Could definitely use this for metal and wood and all sorts of stuff, but for now we've just got it for our wood. So I'm just going to save out my TIFF, and I'm going to turn off layers. There we go, save as a copy, and that's all good to go. And we can bounce back over to Maya. All right, so let's get our shader graphed here. So this is our base wood right here, and now we need to get our V-Ray blend shader connected and working. So we'll get our IPR rolling again. And I'm just going to start with a new V-Ray material. And I want to first get the texture going and looking good on the underlying shader, which is going to be that other texture that I showed you. So I'm going to go in here to my wood, and we'll grab that. There we go. Oh, that one's kind of cool, actually. It doesn't have to be that one that we'll see, we'll try it here. The beauty of this is I'll be able to really easily swap these out and see what different ones look like. So I'm going to delete that shading group. I'm going to control middle click to swap that shading group connection. And I need to get my gamma, texture input gamma, assigned to that. There we go. And we can just drag a brand new render region here. I probably want this to be a little bit bumpy. I do want to tile it a little bit as well. So that's kind of an, you can see there's a really nice color breakup in this texture that I'm using. I probably want to get some specular going. Definitely don't want it all polished like that. I want to turn that glossiness down a lot more. And I want to turn my Lock Fresnel off and set this to 1.33 since this wood is kind of an organic based thing. And I can just immediately get a grungy texture put into this. So we can go to, again, our grunge section. And I really hope, you're starting to see really the way these patterns just start happening. I'm actually, I'm just going to use the same specular. I don't even know how many times I'll use this texture across the, across this DVD, across this video rather. So let me get that connected. And since I used that over there, I am going to just rotate it 90 degrees. And then we'll get it tiled a little bit. And now if I look at my reflection, you can see it's doing its job. Things are looking pretty cool. Looks like I do need to get my texture input gamma on that though. Nice. So in this situation, if a scratch fell across one of these areas, I would still get a little bit of a highlight, which is what I'm looking for. Last but not least, I can go in if I want to and see if I can get a little bit of a bump map pulled off of this texture. Because of the color variation, I would want to be kind of careful with it, and I'm actually going to go into Photoshop here, and I am going to save out this texture using the high pass filter. The high pass filter will really cut back on the contrast in a pretty unique way. You can see what this looks like here. So you can see immediately it starts evening it out, and if I lower that radius, I'll really be able to get some pretty interesting effects here. So that's pretty cool down in there. So it's something a little bit more even. I could also copy this, and actually we'll undo that here. So let's get a new high pass filter. And we'll go in here again. And with this one, what I want to do is, it looks like the person made this didn't paint out I actually got really bad JPEG artifacts in here. I'm probably going to want to fix that in a second too. I think I can, I think it's under reduce noise. We'll figure that out in a second. So, oops, sorry, not offset. I do want to redo a high pass here. I'm going to shrink this down even more. I really want to just try and isolate those darker lines there. And on this one, I'm going to use my levels, and I'm just going to try and pull out some of that detail. So something like that. And I am going to try and go in, and we're going to reduce noise. And I'm going to say remove JPEG artifact. So it did something. I may need to do that. When you're working with textures that are downloaded from the internet, this is always a risk that you run. This is only a 1K texture, 1024 by 1024, so it may be sort of inevitable. I am going to try and see if that definitely helped a little bit, but we'll just ignore it. So just be mindful of that when you're working. I feel like some of these edges are a little bit intense on this one, but I'm just going to use this as a layer here. So I'm going to set this to overlay. I'm just going to turn it way down. So you can see if I start cranking it up, it starts just getting a little bit of those ridges. And what I'm looking for when I'm doing this is where those white values are and where those dark values are. Because you can always think of a bump map or a displacement map for that matter. Well, sometimes, but the mid value is 50% gray in this case. And so I do want to go in and be mindful of where those highs and lows on that image are, because 50% gray is going to be no bump. White will bump up, black will bump down. So you can see if you kind of blur your eyes a little bit, when you're looking at this, you've got some areas where there are some darker lines and some lighter lines. So I want to get a little bit of a texture onto this rough this rough wood that's underneath. I'm just going to flatten that down, and I am actually just going to clone stamp away that little seam, but I do want to do that on a new layer. And then we can erase away a little bit using that other brush that I had, that one with a little bit more texture. We can try this one actually. And so something, I don't want there to be a splotch there that's too visible. So that's cool. Okay, so we'll save this as a TIFF. No layers. And then this is just going to be Wood 04 bump. Save that out. Cool. And last but not least, we'll just leave that one as is. Cool. All right, so let's bring this in. And this texture here, I want to turn off my texture input gamma. And I want to make sure that I've got my bump loaded up. There it is. And we'll map this in. There we go. So it's going to be crazy heavy at first. But you can see I'm getting these really beautiful lines. I'm not getting any bump happening from those areas of color variation, only the lines in the wood. And honestly, because it's kind of subtle, that's not too heavy. It's not actually as bad as I thought it would be. I'm going to want to turn that down a little bit though. I don't need it to be too intense. We can just see how that looks. Feeling pretty cool. Nice. So this can be our shader that we're going to build up our V-Ray blend against. So let's get this created. So I'm going to create my V-Ray blend material. I'm going to bring my base wood in. This is actually, debatable. I guess theoretically speaking, this rough wood may be the base color underneath, and then the stain got put on top. But the way I'm kind of thinking of it is that the scratches happen and they reveal this other shader. So I'm going to make it a coat material. So here's our V-Ray blend. I'm going to get rid of its shading group and maintain our original here, so it gets all the same shading assignments. And right now I have no texture in my blend amount, so we're only rendering the same one we just had. And we just need to bring in that file texture. And here's our tileable scratches. I actually need to invert this because I do right now have black for the scratches. And now I can just map this in and we can see what we get. Pretty cool. Not half bad. I actually really like that. And you can see what's so cool about this is in areas, if it ever gets to pure white, it's going to totally hold out this highlight here. So you can see, even if I inserted a remap here, and I remapped this texture. Oops, let's get this whole thing remapped again here. And let's just really clamp this down, see what happens. There we go. So this color is going to start really cutting in and revealing some of those areas. And just a simple remap texture, and I can control the contrast in this and really just adjust it however I want to, which is pretty awesome. And so if now this is revealing even the smallest scratches across the wood, and I can just dial this right in my IPR until I'm happy with it. So very, very cool effect. Honestly, I actually liked it just mapped in on its own. Actually, that's kind of cool. So now I can see which one I like better. I can just connect that one. This one's a little subtler. I'll stick with that. We'll get rid of the remap. Awesome. So the last finishing touch here, I can, of course, create a V-Ray bump material. And because these scratches would actually be eating into the wood, they're a physical thing that has happened, I can connect this tileable scratches to a V-Ray bump material, and I can go in here and this can add another layer of depth here. Right now, by default, I think this is going to bump out and be, of course, crazy extreme. So I'm going to set this to -0.1. And I do assume that this will go in now. So see, that's kind of interesting. It's definitely a little too intense, though. You can see if you start catching those areas where you almost, I don't want to feel it quite that much. So maybe we'll do like a -0.06 or something. Because I don't want to feel those hard edges on that. See, that's nicer. And if you really look at like your lighting pass here, so you don't even see it at all there. If you look at my reflection though, you can really feel it. So it might be a little too intense, but this is one of those things where I want to make sure I bounce to the other render layers and dial this in slightly different lighting as well. So let's first look at my hard light, my sunshine. So see, this hard light is really making it feel pretty intense, that bump value. So I'm going to dial it here, cut it almost in half again. That's cool. It's feeling pretty nice. And now we can also check things out in Studio A. Oh, sorry, I think Studio A is the same as master layer. That's the same as master. So we'll check Studio B. With our funky specular. So that's feeling pretty cool. We can check the backyard. Not bad, not bad. Feeling pretty cool. And so you get the idea. Check the bunker. See how we feel in the bunker. The backyard actually turned off the visibility on the dome on accident. The bunker render layer is a little bit funky, but it's a dark environment, which I like. And it still feels pretty good. The bunker has these really interesting areas, all these windows that are really bright, so it catches a lot of little specular hits. So it feels a little too new. It does feel a little too glossy, but depending on the final look of the environment that this is going into, that could be desirable. It could be too much. Last but not least, check out the harbor, and we'll see how we feel. I definitely feel like the glossiness is too much, or sorry, the reflection amount you know, it definitely feels a little too shiny up here. So I can do a couple things with that. I can turn down my amount a bit. And then I can bounce back into here and I can say, you know what, maybe that brightness being 0.95, will lower that down to 0.9. And then I'll lower my 0.8 glossiness value to 0.75. So it gets a little duller. So that's feeling a little bit better. And now I can cross-check that and say my sun and sky environment. Feels pretty cool. And you know, I can always rotate my camera around a little bit if I need to. Interesting, looking pretty cool. Bounce that back. And that's it for the wood. So the idea behind these shaders that we're creating is to give you an idea of how to go about doing this and also show how quickly you can generate these shaders for yourself and really populate textures across a whole environment. So that's an example of how to do some wood, and there's a lot more to come.